Hey everyone! Okay, so today I'm going to be doing another review for Warbreaker by Brandom Sanderson. This is gonna be a fun one. I love Sanderson. He has some of the best novels I've ever read. He has kind of a bit of everything. So he has some more YA books, more grade books, more adult books. So many different varieties of fantasy. His fantasy is kind of legendary, really. As you can see, I have some of the secret projects back here, and they are all great. Normally, I do reviews for kind of newer books. I've generally stuck to more YA style, but I just read Warbreaker for the first time and wanted to do a review for it. Even though it is one of his older books, I'm a little late to the party here by like several years. But regardless, I wanted to share some opinions on it because I did definitely enjoy reading it. And when I first read the blurb for the book, I was a little unsure, to be honest. Normally, for his books, I'm always so excited, and I was excited to read Warbreaker, but when I first read the back cover, I was a little unsure and confused. Like, this doesn't really sound like a lot of his other books. I just wasn't sure how much I would like it compared to some of his other works. But I'm in the middle of reading this bad boy, Rhythm of War, the fourth book in the Stormlight Archive series. And there were several Warbreaker references in it, and so I knew I had to go back and read it. So I did. And I definitely enjoyed it so much. I really liked it. A brief overview. So we're mainly following 4 characters throughout the book, and I love each of them, though I can't help but choose favorites. Not gonna lie. So first off, we've got 2 sisters, Ciri and Vivenna. They are both princesses for this kingdom that is deemed sort of insignificant and is kind of constantly threatened by the possibility of war from this much larger kingdom, Hallandren. So Ciri is the youngest daughter of a few of the royal children, right? She deems herself unimportant and is kind of content with it. She doesn't really want a bigger role. Her oldest sister, Vivenna, the other main character, has the most importance. She is to be sent off as basically a sacrifice to be married to the god king of Hallandren. Hallandren has this kind of pantheon structure of these beings called returned, who are their gods. They are worshipped and have this court. I thought it was very kind of interesting. It was sort of almost the Greek god vibes. Now, I wasn't expecting to like this part as much as I did, but I really liked the aesthetic of all these different deities with their roles and mannerisms and everything. And then the different clothing styles, how it all ties into color, which is a very big part of this book. I loved all of the colorful details and everything, but I will talk about that more in a little bit. Back to the plot. Now, Vivenna and Ciri's father, he's not really seen as a bad guy, but I didn't particularly like him. He kind of straight up chooses a favorite child and decides to keep Vivenna and send Ciri to what he assumes is death by the God King, who they see as a very malicious person. Ciri is mind blown, like, I'm the irresponsible child. Oh, why in the world would you send me? And Vivenna is equally taken aback and feels almost like her purpose has been taken away from her. And she has a very interesting arc throughout the whole book. I like that a lot. So that's their dynamic. The next 2 characters are Vasher and Lysong. Now, Vasher, he's less viewpoints throughout the book, but he's a very important side character, very key, and a fan favorite, which I definitely agree with. He's great. So Vasher has a lot of mystery around him. We see him from the very beginning in the prologue, and you're like, what's his goal? What's the deal with this guy? And it kind of leads you to question that a lot throughout the book. But Sanderson weaves in little hints and details, as always, really well done. And this was one of his earlier novels, and I could see that in the writing itself, which wasn't a bad thing. It's always cool to see how writers progress over time, and you can see that through their works. Anyway, so Vasher, we sort of see him as kind of a vigilante almost, and he has a very fun companion, which is a talking sword, and it's almost like the quirky AI type trope, but with a magic sword. So this created a very good character dynamic in my opinion. So Vasher is kind of the loner type, so he wasn't around people for the majority of the book. But having the sword created dialogue and humor and intrigue where there wouldn't have been otherwise had Vasher just been alone the whole time, which would have made sense for his character, but this provided a very unique and fun opportunity for dialogue and more content. And that was really well done. Now, on to the last and my personal favorite, though I love them all. Lightsong just, wow, he was just amazing. So his deal is he is one of the returned, one of the gods, god of bravery. So returned are these beings that were people but died and then came back. And people worship them for their knowledge and wisdom that they have from the other side. Though Lightsong has no memories of this. He doesn't know why he was returned, what his purpose is. Now, he had one of the most interesting character arcs and dynamics that I've ever seen. I thought it was so interesting. Not only was his character so fun and just made me laugh the whole time, but just the very idea. So Lightsong, again, is this deity, this god that is worshipped daily. With this life of convenience, people bring him whatever he wants, he's served constantly, he has people declaring artworks and songs and all sorts of things in honor of him for his entertainment. But he does not believe in his own religion. Half the time he's questioning, am I really a god? Like, this can't be the real deal here, right? And he does not believe he should be worshipped. So his actual character, he is very flamboyant, witty, he says jokes all the time, and he tries to be as lax and as lazy, as useless as possible so that people will not rely on him. And yet they do anyway, and he kind of just wants to bonk them on the head like, what are you doing? Why are you listening to me? I don't give good advice. I'm useless. So he's trying to prove this the whole book and trying to discover who he was in his previous life before he died and became returned. So his whole thing was just so interesting and engaging, unique and fun. He was so funny. And his dynamic with the goddess of love and compassion, Fleshweaver, a fellow returned, is kind of like this seductress, and they have so much banter and great interactions, and I love the whole dynamic. Very well done, as always. I really enjoyed it. The magic, of course, was really great and interesting. Slightly different than some of his usual tastes, but in a lot of his books, you have to draw it from something from around you. It's not just this well of power that people are born with, you have to take from something. And in this case, it is color, which I thought was so interesting, and it created a aesthetic for the book. I think it would be really cool in kind of an animated, almost kind of oil painting where the colors are just bleeding into each other and you can really see the auras and color changes that it's describing, and these deep and vibrant and shifting colors, and then duller colors for certain moments. Just seeing all of that expression on screen would be so cool. Now, for a lot of his books, I think animation would be okay. Generally, in book adaptations, I imagine them more live action, and that is generally my preference. But for this one, its strength would be animation. And without a lot of movies are looking nowadays, like Spider-Verse, for example, was kind of a peak of animation, and it would just adapt so well to this book in that paint style. But how the color connected to the breaths and kind of like the person's soul, that was like a little confusing to me at first, and I'm still a little unclear as like how that all ties in, but definitely a very interesting system, and how breaths were passed around and different restrictions and laws, and how that did tie into the color, how people perceived the world and people perceived people with breath and with awakening and everything. It was all very interesting style. Again, a little different from some of his other novels, but still undeniably Sanderson. So really, really well done. Now I'm going to go ahead and go into spoilers because there are so many things I want to talk about further into detail with, because as with a lot of his books, there's so much detail and clues and lots to delve into. Maybe not as much as some of his other significantly larger novels, but regardless, there's a lot I want to talk about. Okay, so now going into spoilers. I honestly don't really know where to start. There are so many things that I want to talk about. Wow. I guess first major plot points and things that surprised me. I've read so many books at this point, and a lot of modern literature, I feel like, follows a lot of the same patterns, which is understandable because people are drawing from other modern elements. It just makes sense that there would be patterns like that. And I don't mind guessing things. I don't mind being right about things that happen in the plot. Regardless, it's always nice to be surprised once in a while and not guess exactly what's going to happen. With Sanderson, one of many of his talents is making you think that you know exactly what's going to happen and setting everything up, but then having these major plot twists that usually make more sense and you just didn't see it coming. In this one, it had this, not in the grand scale and not in so many different ways as in some of his other novels, but definitely didn't see them coming. We had multiple betrayals and plot twists here. Now, the first betrayal was Denth. Now, of course this happened. Denth from the very beginning is talking about how he shouldn't be trusted, but also giving people bad raps for never trusting mercenaries and thinking they're always going to do the bad thing. So with joking about this so lightly and so openly, he created a false trust in Vivenna, so neither she nor I could see that he was really one of the villains. This was such a good way of doing it. One of the things about writing villains is you've got to make people like them. If this character is really likable, they're not going to assume that they're evil. There are a lot of characters that we know are villains and they're still likable. But initially when you view a very likable character, you're not going to assume that this is an evil character. And with him joking about exactly this, like half the book, you just don't see it coming. At least I didn't. Maybe some of you who are smarter did see the betrayal coming. It was obvious and it wasn't at the same time. And then the next is with Blue Fingers. Again, it made sense, but I also definitely didn't see it coming until the very end when it had basically already happened. So he did it well where he could connect it to all of this, right? And like, oh, it really was them all along. But there were also some inconsistencies that weren't exactly explained. For example, with the God King, initially Ciri's told that he can have children and is just different from other returns. And the priests are pressuring her so much to have a child, right? But then we learn that he actually can't have children. It was kind of confusing, like what was the whole point of them pressuring her so much to have a child when she never could have in the first place? And she would be aware of this. She would know if she wasn't pregnant, right? Yet they made the public think that she wasn't. And that makes sense in a way. If they want the God King's line to be seen as legitimate and like it is being passed from father to son, they don't want people to know that it is a returned child coming from a random place, and that it is from the line to create a legitimacy of the airing system. Now that makes sense for the public point of eye, but in Ciri's point of view, either way, she wouldn't have been able to have a child. So I just didn't understand why Tralades and the other priests were pressuring her into it so much. That didn't really seem necessary when it would have been fake either way, and Ciri never would have been pregnant in the first place. So that was just something that it didn't exactly explain, and I wasn't sure the reason for that. But overall, I really liked it. I thought the plot was handled well generally. The twists were really good, and the character dynamics were amazing, of course. Ciri and the God King's relationship was very interesting. So Ciri being shipped off to marry the God King, that was something I was expecting. It just made sense plot-wise that it would make a big deal of Vivenna being the chosen one and Ciri being insignificant. Of course they would swap places and Ciri would be the sacrifice in her stead. Now, what I wasn't sure about is how Sanderson would handle it, because this is a very common trope in a way, the princess being shipped off to an arranged marriage with the evil king, right? I feel like that has happened in a lot of books, but that type of plot just isn't really a Sanderson fashion, so I was wondering how he would handle that, and if he would even follow that route of her falling in love with the God King. I even wondered at one point if she would fall in love with Lightsong instead, but when Blushweaver was introduced and they had kind of that banter and everything, and the first time Lightsong and Ciri interacted, I kind of knew that's not where he would be going with it. And we definitely knew there's something going on with the God King. There was definitely mystery, and I went through a lot of possibilities, but I did not imagine that it would be because he couldn't talk. It made some sense. The priests needed to keep a check on all that power, right? It was interesting how Vasher told them centuries before to keep a hold of. That was kind of their main drive, the whole thing, more almost than following their own religion of the pantheon that they basically created themselves. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, I wasn't expecting him to just not be able to talk and not know what's happening. I felt bad for the poor guy, honestly. But his relationship with Siri was pretty cute. And it was cool to see him unleash all of that power in the end when Lightsong healed him. That was also such a great ending for Lightsong's character arc. I kind of figured that it would have to do with him saving someone, but I had no idea who and how it would really tie into the main plot, because I really wanted it to be significant for Lightsong, but I didn't know how that would work. But him deciding to heal his God King made so much sense, and it really emphasized the arc and Lightsong's character and everything, which I love so much. And what Scoot revealed and being his brother and what his past life was like. Him just being a scholar when he thought he could have been this bold detective, this hero, I thought was very interesting. Not what I was expecting. It was a good pivotal point. Just so well done. I love Lightsong's arc so much. So good. Now the next major plot twist would definitely be how Vasher ended up being both Kalad and Peacegiver. Now you kind of suspect from the beginning that he's more than he's letting on and not exactly fully human. I figured he was one of the Return, but was also confused how he looked human and wasn't sure how that worked. But I guess he was just able to hide it somehow. We know he has more secrets and abilities being a Return than the other Returned knew about because they weren't explained to them. How the priest kept certain things from the Returned, kept them in the dark about things. But yes, I suspected he was something other, but I did not imagine that he would be Kalad and Peacegiver at the same time. The possibility that he was Peacegiver crossed my mind, but not as much Kalad. I didn't think that would be him. But that he ended up being both was very interesting and just shows how the history changed and was morphed, which is realistic really, but it did a good job of like melding that ancient history and like sprinkling hints of it and how the characters are trying to figure out what's going on, and then tying that into the grand climax and overarching part of the story. So yeah, just really well done. Great plot and characters as always, very unique and interesting. Again, really like this book. I was a little unsure about it first, but it was definitely worth the read. I really enjoyed it and would recommend. So I think that's all for today on spoilers and basic plot and everything. I look forward to seeing you in future videos. So goodbye!